For those of you who have just joined us, welcome to the Q Biologics webinar, Is the Restore Trial Right for Me? Thanks for joining us today to learn more about whether this trial is potentially right for you. We'll touch on the current Crohn's disease treatment landscape and how this therapy is designed to work differently, as well as some factors to consider when deciding if the Restore Crohn's disease clinical trial is an option for you. First, a bit of housekeeping. Everyone except the presenters and the organizer will be muted during the webinar. This will help eliminate background noise and audio feedback interference. Questions can be sent via live chat. The chat can be opened by clicking on the chat vignette, the conversation bubble on your screen. We will aim to answer all of your questions after the presentation is finished. A reminder to people who are phoning in from a telephone line, please also sign into your computer or tablet if you want to follow along with the visual presentation. If you cannot hear the speaker, see the slides, use the chat, or you get completely disconnected, don't panic. The presentation will be recorded and made public on our website under Resources. Our web address is QIBD.com. That's spelled QUIBD.com. You'll also be able to find other resources listed there. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, QIBD, and follow us on Twitter at Q Crohn's Trial. And now on to the reason you're all here. Today we have with us Dr. Shirin Kalyan, an immunologist and Q's Scientific Director of Scientific Innovation, and Andrea Cameron, the clinical research nurse who guides potential study participants through the trial process. Dr. Kalyan is a translational immunologist and leads Q's Scientific Innovation. She earned her doctorate in experimental medicine and is a faculty member in the Department of Medicine with the University of British Columbia. Dr. Kalyan has been studying the pathophysiology of disease rooted in immune dysfunction and metabolic disturbances for over 18 years. She was awarded the prestigious Humboldt Fellowship to conduct research in Germany, to investigate how commonly used drugs affect the immune function in people, and to harness the healing potential of the innate immune system for immunotherapy. Andrea Cameron has been working as a research nurse for over 10 years. She is a registered nurse, has her Master of Science in Clinical Research, and is a passionate patient advocate with extensive experience helping participants navigate the clinical research process. In this trial, Andrea will help determine if you are eligible for the study and if you meet pre-screening criteria. Refer you to an appropriate clinical trial site. The final determination of eligibility will be made at the clinical site. Now over to Shirin and Andrea for their presentation, and thank you, Shirin and Andrea.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to everyone who's joining us this evening. We hope to be able to answer all the questions you may have either about QBECO, which is the treatment that Q is developing, as well as anything you may have to ask about the clinical trial itself regarding eligibility and the process involved in participating in the trial. To start off, we'll just give you an overview of the current treatment paradigm for Crohn's disease, and this is to help you put into context how our treatment is fundamentally different from the current treatment approach for inflammatory bowel diseases. So the current way inflammatory bowel diseases such as Crohn's disease, as well as UC, ulcerative colitis, are currently treated is based on symptom management. So we're trying to deal with the inflammation, but not what the underlying issue is in terms of the problem. So in analogy, if you have a broken leg and it hurts, we're trying to take away the pain, but not necessarily fixing the leg. The way that treatment is initiated is the step-up approach that you see. Oftentimes we start with starting with steroids, which provides immediate relief. But the goal is not to stay on steroids for a very long period of time. The next step up is an immunosuppressive, and as disease progresses, the patients are often put on biologics. We're thinking that this step-up model is going to change perhaps in the near future because the biologics that are currently used are a lot more targeted. But the cost of treatment will determine what type of drug you're going to be given initially. However, despite our large arsenal of immunosuppressive medications that are available for us, disease progression has not really been altered for the majority of patients living with Crohn's disease, and many of them often end up having to undergo surgery regardless. So when we start at the bottom rung of the ladder, we have steroids. And steroids are very effective in providing immediate relief. They're very potent immunosuppressive agents, and this very complicated picture is essentially demonstrating the number of different ways that steroids can block immune function. And so they do provide immediate relief, but strong steroids such as prednisone is not meant to maintain remission for a long period of time due to toxicity. So long-term or high-dose steroid use is related to side effects such as infections, diabetes, weight gain, osteoporosis, wound healing, cataracts, and the list continues. So the idea is you control the flare, but you can't really stay on steroids for a long period of time. What has historically been used for most patients is one of the immunosuppressive agents, such as thiopurine. And thiopurine was initially used as an anti-cancer agent. It's a very strong immunosuppressant, and it works by inhibiting purine synthesis. So purine is sort of the building blocks of your DNA and RNA, and by blocking purine synthesis, you're essentially blocking the ability of cells to make new cells. And this leads to immune suppression because in the bone marrow, where your immune cells are made, the ability to make new immune cells is reduced. So you have bone marrow suppression. Of course, this would make you really susceptible to serious infections. And common side effects of thiopurine are liver toxicity, fatigue, hair loss, vomiting, anorexia, and there is a tendency to have easy bruising or bleeding, and unfortunately also bloody stools, which is not really desired in the context of inflammatory bowel disease, and there's also the risk of cancer. Thiopurines, interestingly enough, were actually discovered through a chemical weapons program in the U.S., so this is a serious medication. Methotrexate is an anti-metabolite, and at the end of the day, it works very similar to a thiopurine. It is an immunosuppressant. It is also used as an anti-cancer agent. It works by blocking an enzyme called dihydrofolate reductase. And by blocking this enzyme, you're actually blocking the ability to make the active form of folate, which is vitamin B9, which again is important for growth. And it comes down to making purines again. And so at the end of the day, methotrexate would have very similar side effects to thiopurines, leading from the bone marrow suppression. People can sort of deal with some of the side effects by taking folate supplementation while on methotrexate. Now we're sort of fortunate to come upon biologics in the context of what we are currently using or were currently using for IBD, and biologics are a lot more targeted. And in the context of Crohn's disease and inflammatory bowel disease in general, it's often considered to be another type of immunosuppressant, but that's a bit of a misnomer. Biologics just means it's a therapy that's isolated or it's derived from a natural source, either human, animal, or microorganism. It doesn't really necessarily need to be an immunosuppressive agent. So in this context, QBECO, the product that Q is developing, which is derived from a microorganism, is considered a biologic. In contrast to most drugs that are chemically synthesized and their structure is easy and known, such as aspirin, most biologics are complex mixtures that are not easily identified or characterized. And these include a wide range of products such as vaccines, blood and blood components, allergenics, somatic cells, gene therapy, tissues, and recombinant proteins such as the antibodies that are currently used for the treatment of IBD. So the first biologic that was used for CD as well as UC is anti-TNF. So TNF is a secreted molecule made by your immune cells, and the function of tumor necrosis alpha is to induce fever. It gives you that rise in temperature when you're trying to fight off an infection. It is associated with inflammation, but it's also responsible for the death and damage of infected cells. So it takes cells that are damaged in some way, either because they're infected or they're malignant, such as they've turned cancerous. Tumor necrosis alpha actually helps to get rid of those damaged and cells that are malignant in nature. And it helps to prevent viruses from replicating in cells. So when you're blocking tumor necrosis alpha's function, the potential side effects are, again, serious infections, as well as the reactivation of potentially latent viruses you may have, and an increase in certain types of cancers. Metalizumab, or the brand name Entyvio, is actually a lot more specific. It's not a secreted molecule. It's an integrin, and so its side effects is a lot more localized. And if there was a preference of mine, I would really like this biologic because it has a neat function. An integrin is sort of like a sticky molecule that hangs on top of the epithelial cells, and its job is to grab onto activated immune cells that are rolling by. And by grabbing onto them, it sort of pulls it in like a rope into the tissue. So its job is really to allow activated immune cells to get into the tissues to fight whatever infection might be there. By blocking the ability of the immune cells to bind to these integrins on top of your epithelial cells, you're essentially preventing the ability of these activated immune cells to enter the tissues, thereby preventing inflammation. And some of the common side effects of Entyvio are just upper respiratory infections, joints, and some other pains, as well as headaches. And the newest biologic that has been approved for Crohn's disease is Stelara. It is, again, targeting a secreted molecule. There are actually two types of the same molecule, interleukin-12 and its family member, interleukin-23. And the job of these molecules is essentially to activate the inflammatory T cells and natural killer cells, which are important for fighting cancers and viral infections. Stelara was first approved for use in psoriasis, and just very recently, a couple of years ago, was approved for the use in CD. Some of the risk factors, because it's a secreted molecule, again, are systemic, so you have the risk of serious infections and cancer, again, and potential brain swelling. Common side effects include fatigue, headache, and upper respiratory infections again. So when we're summarizing what are the main differences between what is currently available for the treatment of Crohn's disease and what QBECO, what Q is trying to develop, is here's a table that just sort of summarizes that. So basically, the current treatment aims to suppress immune function and inflammation, and thereby dealing with the symptoms of the disease. What QBECO hopes to do is to restore the innate immune function so that the barrier function in the gut is rebuilt, and we're able to deal with the dysbiosis and infection by allowing your immune system to be productive in its ability to deal with infection. The current treatments are basically, as you've seen, a hit and miss approach. You try one drug, hopefully it'll work for you. If not, you're put on another immunosuppressive agent. And we think that because we're treating the ability of the innate immune system to get reprogrammed and restore its function, that we can potentially put personalized medicine with QBECO, because we have biomarkers that show a strong correlation between a person's ability to respond and the ability to restore normal immune function. The current treatments are expected to be lifelong in nature, but we are hoping that by restoring the immune function of patients and we get rid of the trigger that initially precipitated the disease, that we can potentially get people off of medications, and this is something that we'll be investigating in our current trial. And the current treatments, of course, have, as I've mentioned, have come with significant serious risks with the long-term immune suppression that patients are needing to stay with for a long period of time to maintain a remission. And we hope that the safety profile of our drug will be different in terms of not having to inhibit the immune function of patients. And we're hoping that the good safety profile we have to date is maintained, and we'll be looking at that in our current trial. So who would be interested in this study that is currently taking place? We feel that the people living with Crohn's disease for whom their current treatments are not working at this time, i.e. they're experiencing active symptoms, would be one group of patients who would be interested in this trial. The other group are people who have just recently been diagnosed with Crohn's disease and are actively looking for options other than going on long-term immune suppression. Okay, and with that, I'll now hand it over to Andrea to tell you more about the RESTORE trial and its objectives. Andrea?
Thank you, Shirin. So we'll start with the objectives of the RESTORE trial, which are to evaluate the effect of QBECO site-specific immunomodulator on endoscopic healing and remission, clinical remission as measured by abdominal pain and soft stools frequency, and safety and tolerability of the drug. In the next slide, this trial is to be conducted in 2 stages. The first stage is an open label study, meaning all participants will receive active treatment, and aims to answer the question, when would be the best time to assess mucosal healing in patients treated with QBECO, week 16 or week 26. This will inform the second stage of the study, which will take place next year and will be a randomized placebo-controlled trial. Participants enrolled in the first stage 20-patient study will be undergoing 4 colonoscopies over the 52-week trial period. Those participating in the second stage or 150-patient study will have only 3 colonoscopies based on the results of the 20-patient study, but not all will receive the active drug QBECO. Next slide. Here is the schedule of events to be expected by participating in the trial. So it involves 10 in-person and 3 remote or telephone visits. Study drug, test fees, and study-related travel will be paid for by the study sponsor, Qu Biologics. RESTORE trial participants will be required to commit between 22 and 29 days for study-related clinic visits and procedures. The total time commitment will depend on whether participants opt to use a remote lab service for the visits on weeks 24, 32, and 56, which don't require in-clinic attendance. Other factors that would affect time commitment are post-colonoscopy recovery time and distance traveled. These are the samples that will be collected and study procedures to be expected. So there will be blood, stool, urine analysis, biopsy taken during colonoscopy with histopathology, clinic visits, and physical examinations. QBECO is self-administered by subcutaneous injection every 2nd day. It's administered very similar to an insulin injection. Participants will be trained how and where to do the injections, which are rotated between the abdomen and thighs. Here are the overall eligibility criteria. So participants must be at least 18 years old, have Crohn's disease diagnosed via colonoscopy at least 3 months ago, have moderate to severe disease defined by the colonoscopy and clinical symptoms, and be willing to follow contraception guidelines. In the must not have column, patients must not have had biologics therapy 60 days prior to the screening colonoscopy, not be anticipating major surgery, not be experiencing an active infection, not have an ostomy, and not have had extensive bowel resection. In this next slide, we'll talk about other important considerations regarding eligibility. So it's important that you have a diagnosis of Crohn's disease rather than ulcerative colitis. Also, if you've had previous difficulties with colonoscopies, for example, strictures preventing passage of the scope, this may affect the study doctor's ability to document Crohn's disease via colonoscopy. You also have to consider the time from your work and home life to attend the clinic visits. And for visits requiring colonoscopies, because you'll be sedated, you'll have to have a companion accompany you home upon discharge from the colonoscopy unit. Pending sufficient funding, Q Biologics is planning on making QBECO treatment available after the RESTORE trial through an open-label rollover study. Eligibility criteria for that study is yet to be determined. There is a pre-screening questionnaire available at www.restoretrial.ca for people who are interested in participating and believe they qualify for the trial. If the pre-screening questionnaire shows you're eligible, you'll be contacted by me, Andrea Cameron. I'm the clinical research nurse for the trial. We will go over eligibility criteria, and I will then refer you to one of the 3 trial sites. Final study eligibility will be confirmed after all screening procedures are completed. We have 2 sites in the Metro Vancouver area and 1 in Hamilton, Ontario for the 20-patient study. We'll be expanding these across Canada and the United States for the subsequent 150-patient QBECO randomized control trial.
Now's the time you can send in your questions via chat. If you have any questions which you'd like directed to either of our experts, please indicate their name when you type in the question. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can. We'll give everyone a moment to actually send in their questions. So if there's no questions, I would like to thank everybody for taking time to join us for Q Biologics webinar about how QBECO SSI therapy is designed to work differently from other therapies, and learn more about whether the RESTORE trial is potentially right for you. We really appreciate all your time that you've given us, and a special thanks to our experts, Shirin and Andrea, for joining us today and answering and being available to answer the questions. You can always find more information by going to our website, QIBD.com. That's QUIBD.com. That's where the link to this recording of the webinar will be posted next week. If you'd like to sign up to participate in our current clinical trial of QBECO for Crohn's disease, as Andrea mentioned, your first step should be to complete the online pre-screening questionnaire at www.restoretrial.ca. After that, Andrea will be able to start guiding you through the clinical trial process, and if you are a likely candidate, refer you to a trial site. Remember to follow us on social media. Like us on Facebook at QIBD. Follow us on Twitter at Q Crohn's Trial. And just a reminder that we do have a...
Oh, we got a question, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
So what does your drug specifically do to the immune system? That's a great question, and I should have mentioned, and I wanted to during the presentation, that we have given a webinar that is currently up that speaks to the mechanism of action of QBECO. So to give you an idea what QBECO is, it's actually an inactivated gut pathogen. It was a clinical isolated. And the way QBECO works is by sort of making the immune system aware that there's a problem in the gut. So we're recruiting new immune cells that are made in the bone marrow. So it's sort of mimicking an acute infection in a way that sends an alarm to your body saying there's a problem. Because under the context of chronic inflammation, what happens is that your immune system, in a feedback mechanism, tends to shut down, and you're unable to then relaunch an effective immune response to bugs that are entering your gut through so you experience a leaky gut. And the current treatments are dampening the inflammation of that process, but it's not dealing with the fact that you have a barrier dysfunction in your gastrointestinal organ. And so what we're trying to do is we use a pathogen that's actually a normal resident of the intestines, and we're delivering it away from all that noise. So your immune system that is not affected by that chronic inflammation and suppression sees this problem, and it says, oh, well, it rings the bell and it sends its troops to the gut to look for where that leak is coming from. And when it gets there, these new cells are able to respond much more effectively to the fact that you have dysbiosis in the gut, and helps rebuild that barrier function. So we've shown some of that data that we have collected, and we just have a manuscript that was published in Frontiers in Immunology describing this process, and looking at patients with ulcerative colitis who we've shown had experienced a mucosal improvement in their mucosal area and inflammation. There's another question now that they're coming in. So please do look at the webinar. It's currently up regarding how QBECO works, and we will be posting when that full manuscript is out, describing in experimental models as well as in patients how using this innate immune activator actually helps rebuild the immune system in the gut instead of suppressing immune function. So it's a completely different way of looking at the disease. The underlying cause of CD seems to be more of an inability to respond to microbial infection if you look at the genetics and some of the clinical symptoms. So it's actually a lack of a strong immune response that's the problem, and that's what we're trying to fix. So another question is this similar to a killed flu virus? It's not a flu virus. It's not a vaccine per se. The idea is not to target the bug. The idea is to wake up the immune system, but the best way to wake up the immune system is by mimicking an acute infection. This has been known for some time. If you go back and historically, that same approach was used to deal with malignancy, because a lot of chronic issues, health issues, happens when your immune system actually goes to sleep. The other part, in contrast, an autoimmune disorder is when your immune system is responding inappropriately to itself. Crohn's disease had historically been called an autoimmune disorder, but now we know it's not normally caused by the fact that your immune system is fighting its own tissues. It's trying to deal with an invasion that's happening at the gut level. And the third question that came in, is there any theoretical reason for significant side effects with this mechanism? That's a great question. We have the main side effects would be the same that you would get when you are fighting off an infection. So we've seen from our previous trials that you have this transient flu-like symptoms, and that's your immune system kicking back into action. We haven't seen any long-term side effects like what you see with chronic immune suppression, but this is something we're keeping our eye on. But in terms of what the patient will experience while on this therapy, and we think it's normally a good sign when you get sort of a transient flu-like symptoms kicking in. But other than that, we haven't seen any other side effects. Have you, Jim?
But we'll be evaluating that as we go through our clinical trial process.
Right. Great. Thank you for those great questions that came in.
If you do have any questions, there's still time to send in the questions, so please feel free to do that.
Yeah.
As we're waiting for the next question to come along, just a reminder that on Thursday evening, Dr. Gunn will be giving a lecture, the information of which, in the Vancouver area, the information of which is on the website with regard to the location. So just a reminder, if you're interested in hearing more about Q Biologics and the clinical trial, that both Dr. Gunn and Andrea will be in attendance giving that public lecture.
And I do recommend checking out some of the resources we do have on our website describing some of the mechanism of action and other issues related to both the clinical study results from our previous trials, as well as what to expect with participating in this current trial.
Well, again, thank you very much to both Shirin and Andrea for their presentation today, and I thank everybody for their participation and for sending along the great questions. Just a reminder to follow us on social media, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. Again, thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for upcoming news and events. Thank you for your participation today.
Well, good evening.